Hello, welcome to my demo for the Coder School. I'm Coach Joe. This is part 2 out of 4 of my Intro to Game Dev series. This is for the student who wants to learn Lua, maybe for Roblox, but they don't want to start on Roblox yet. They want to do a more 2D type of game with Lua to practice it first. So my suggestion would be to learn with the Love2D engine, which is a really lightweight engine, and it's really good for beginners. Now I'm going to be talking about some pros and cons in the Love2D engine. So first, pros. The engine is relatively simple, and that's useful because it provides a lot of functions that allow you to really get going in development right off the bat without teaching function declaration. We had to teach function declaration in Canvas because Canvas didn't have those functions. And so bypassing that allows you to get move on to like more important stuff for learning game dev in the first lesson. It's also a really, really fun engine to use. And part of that is because the community is so friendly in Lua. It's a really, Lua is really only used in game development. And it's a very simple language syntactically. So you can just take off with the Lua development. But that's also kind of a con. And so I mentioned as one of the cons that Love2D is low value. And I don't want to undersell the value of learning to code in general, because a lot of these programming languages are really similar syntactically. If they're making anything, they're learning something, right? But I say Love2D is low value compared to the other demos in this series, because it's only used in game development. So you can't apply knowledge of Lua to other fields. And it's pretty much only going to be 2D games like this and games like Roblox. But if that's what the student wants to learn, then this is the way to go. Also, it's restricted to 2D. You can't do 3D development in Love2D. Okay, so let's get started on Love2D. So first of all, you're going to have them download the installer depending on their operating system. It's probably Windows or Mac. The installer is going to download pretty quick, and the install should be pretty quick too. And then they're going to need an IDE or a text editor. So I recommend Sublime Text for Mac, Notepad++ for Windows. Okay, and then I should explain how to actually open the engine. So here on my desktop, we have this Untitled project folder. This folder can be named anything. We have either the Love executable or a shortcut to the executable. And then inside the project folder, we have a file called main.lua. So main.lua needs to be called main.lua. That's the first file it's going to call in the engine. So what you do is you drag the folder into the executable, and there's our game. It's blank because we haven't written anything yet. Okay, so in the code, the first thing you're gonna have them write is the player object. You just say player equals curly brackets, so that creates the player object. And then they're gonna write 3 functions: love.load, love.update, and love.draw. Love.load happens right when the game loads. You can also call this function from a different part of your code. That would be like if you're resetting the game. Love.update happens every single frame. Don't worry about the delta time parameter yet. Love.draw also happens every frame, but it draws to the screen. So it happens after update. Okay, so first of all, we're going to declare a bunch of variables in love.load. And the way we're going to write them, these will be global, so they will reach outside the scope of love.load. Okay, so first of all, we're going to get the width and height of the screen. And let's just go to the Love documentation to get that. There's this helpful function called love.graphics.getdimensions. So we're going to use this code. It's width, height equals love.graphics.getDimensions. There's also love.graphics get width and get height if you want to do them separately, but this is kind of a nifty way to do this. So just like that, width, height, love.graphics.getDimensions. Okay, and then they're going to do a bunch of player variables. So we're going to say player.x equals width divided by 4. Player.y equals height. Let's say height minus 50. So these are just the starting coordinates for the player. We're gonna have the player a bit off of the ground. The top of the screen is 0, by the way. So to put the player closer to the ground, you would use that height variable we got earlier for the height of the screen, and then minus 50 just so they start a bit off of the ground. Okay, and then we'll say player.width equals 10, player.height equals 10, then player.speed equals 6. That's their max speed. Player.vel x equals 16. We'll give them an initial velocity just so we know that when the game starts that physics is kind of working. You could also set velocity x to 0. It's okay. So player.vel y equals 0. They're going to be falling because they're going to start in the air, but we'll set it to 0 initially. Okay, and then last player variable, player.jumping equals false, because by default they're not jumping. Let's put a line between the player variables so we can separate them. Okay, and then friction equals 0.9, gravity equals 0.5. Okay, that should be good for love.load. So pretty quick. If you saw my Canvas tutorial, this is definitely faster because there's like less verbose functions here. We don't have to use like these browser functions that we have to use for Canvas. So it's overall just like a quicker tutorial. So now in update, we're going to check the keys. So there's this list, key constants. You can find this on the Love documentation. This tells you all of the strings you need for the key codes. So like the A key, for example, is just the letter A. Space bar is just space, so that's good to know. So yeah, have them bookmark this if they're gonna be doing a lot of key inputs. They can bookmark any of these documentation pages. That's good to ask them to bookmark things. Okay, so it looks like in the documentation, there's also love.keyboard is down. So that's what we're going to use for our key presses. So there's some example code here, and you see it's used if love.keyboard is down, and then the key code. So let's just copy that here. So if love keyboard is down, and let's start with the right and D movement. So if love keyboard is down, right or D, and let's put another condition in this if statement. We'll say and, type the word and. So and player dot vel x is less than player dot speed. So they're only going to speed up when they're pressing the key and they're not already at their max speed. If they are at their max speed, they're going to keep going at that speed. Okay, so then player.vel x equals player.vel x plus 1. We just increment the velocity by 1 on key presses. Okay, then end to end that if statement. And you can have them copy this for the other key press. That's pretty similar. We'll change the key codes. The string can be left and the A key, because we're supporting arrow keys and WASD. And then they have to reverse this sign, so it's player.velx is greater than negative player speed. So put a minus sign in front of player speed. And then this is going to increment the player velocity by -1. So player.velx -1 right there. Okay, so then for jumping, it's going to be the spacebar. So if love.keyboard is down space, and another condition, so space and not player.jumping. So we only want them to jump if the player is not already jumping. So if love keyboard down space and not player jumping, then player.jumping equals true. So this sets this makes it so they can't jump midair, because we're going to have it so well, we already have it here in the if statement. This if statement won't fire if player jumping equals true. So we set it true so they can't do a double jump. This is code you would modify if you want them to implement a double jump. They can. That's a good puzzle for them too, the double jump. Okay, and then to actually move the player upwards, because 0 is the top of the screen, we subtract from their y velocity. So player.vel y equals negative player.speed times 2. Yeah. We're just using player speed for left-right movement and for the jump speed. Okay, and then an end. So that's good for key presses. Now we're moving on to physics, and you can have them write a comment. In Lua, comments are just a double hyphen. So hyphen hyphen physics. Okay. So now player.vel x equals player.vel x times friction. So if you multiply by a fraction, it's going to get closer and closer to 0 every frame, and that's how we create friction. Player.vel y equals player.vel y plus gravity. Okay. And now player.x equals player.x plus player.vel x. These are the two lines of code that make the velocity significant. It makes the player actually move their coordinates. Player.y plus player.vel y. Okay. Now we're going to write a placeholder comment, keep player in boundaries. This keeps the player in the boundaries of the screen, so we basically add collision to the edges of the screen. But we're writing a placeholder comment here, and we'll come back to this code to finish it, because we don't have a helper function to finish this code. We're going to write the helper function later. Okay, so have them write another comment, ready to jump, or something to that effect. It could also say player touches the ground, because we reset the player's ability to jump when they touch the ground. So if, oh, no parentheses, if player.y is greater than or equal to height minus, let's say 10, no wait, player.height. So if player.y is greater than or equal to height minus player.height, then player.jumping equals false. So that's all we have to write to reset their ability to jump. Okay, end. This is also code you could modify, or they could modify if they were doing a double jump. Okay, so now we're down in love.draw. So we're about 2/3 of the way through this code. It's going a lot faster than my Canvas tutorial. If you saw Canvas, that's because Love2D is a really pleasant platform. So, first we have to set the brush color. So here's the Love documentation on set color. So it looks like love.graphics.setColor. So let's just copy this line. And we can set it to 1, 1, and 1, and that should be white. So we'll make the player white for now. These values are 0 to 1, so red, green, and blue. And if you make them 1, 1, 1, it's just going to be white. Okay, so then this other documentation page shows love.graphics.rectangle. We're just going to draw the player as a rectangle for now. You could also render an image. So let's say love graphics, rectangle. You don't need to set the mode. Or wait, I think you do. Yeah, we should say fill. So fill mode, and then we'll say, wait, yeah, let's look at the example code here. There should be example at the bottom. Yeah, so we should say fill if we want it to fill the entire player as a square. So fill player.x, player.y, player.width, and player.height. Okay, so let's see what the result looks like so far. Drag this folder into love. Okay, did you see that? Right at the bottom, the player shows up for a sec and then they fall outside of the screen. Okay, so that's really good progress. It's not playable at this point yet, and even within a trial, you should be able to go a little further than this. But it's okay if this is where you end up in the first session, because you want to be going at the student's pace. That's the most important thing. So, okay, so where are we? Keep player in boundaries. But before we write this code, we need a helper function. This is a really good quiz if you want to like quiz them, even if they're just learning functions for the first time. They don't need experience to solve this kind of puzzle. We're going to put this function at the end. So all it does is it makes sure that a number is within the minimum and maximum. And then it'll return the number. And if it was outside of the maximum, it just sets it to the minimum or the maximum, depending on which bound it was closer to. Okay, so it's a pretty simple function, and they should be able to write this on their own if you give them some encouragement. So let's use the clamp up here. Keep player in boundaries. We're going to say player.x equals clamp. Then the first parameter is player.x again. It's just the data that you're modifying. And then I think it started with minimum. Yeah, so minimum and then maximum. The minimum for the x is going to be 0, just the left side of the screen. Then the right side of the screen will be width. And we'll say width minus player.width. Because if we don't do that, then they could be kind of outside of the screen halfway. So player.y equals clamp. Player.y is the first parameter because we're modifying it. And then let's say that the ceiling is like -50. So they can kind of like jump above the screen boundary a bit. Okay, and then the ground is the same as this function here. So height minus player.height. Okay, let's see how this looks so far. Okay, so here we have the player. They can move around. So this is a good playable point to stop for the first session. But if you still have time, of course, keep going. So you have to use your best judgment. If you don't think that your student is at a good stopping point, you can start copying and pasting bigger snippets of code into their Zoom chat. And then they can use those snippets to sort of catch up to get them to a point where they have like a fully functional, fully interactive, playable app that they can tweak and toy with in the interim between sessions. And then in a later session, you can go back and review the code that they didn't write with them. But we want them to have like a fully functional app by the end. So let's pretend that the next feature they want to write is platforms. So we're going to say platforms equals curly brackets. This is also how you make an array as well as objects in Lua. And then to declare the individual platforms in love.load, we say the same thing. We say platforms 0 equals curly brackets. And then we can say platforms 0.x equals, let's say 300. Platforms 0.y, let's also say 300 for that. Platforms 0.width equals, let's say 200. Platforms 0.height equals, let's say 50. Okay, and then we'll have another platform for the example. So platforms 1 equals empty curly brackets. Platforms 1.x, let's say 450. Platforms, platforms 1.y, let's say 500. Platforms 1.width equals 100. Platforms 1.height is going to equal 50 as well. Okay, so now we need to do the collision for them in the update function. So we'll write a for loop for platform collisions. But first, we're going to write the for loop in the draw function that renders each platform. Okay, so for loops in Lua, they look pretty similar to other languages. You say for, and then you declare a new variable. We'll say I equals 0 as the initial value, and then comma, and the next field is just the terminal value for that variable. So we're going to get the length of the platforms array. And the way you do that is with the pound or the hashtag symbol. So we're going to say pound platforms. And then the third field would be the amount it increments by. And if you don't have a third field, by default, it increments by 1. So that's what we're going to do. But yeah, you don't need that third field, but it's there. Okay, and we'll preemptively write the end for that for loop. Oh yeah, and it's for do is the syntax. So for do. Okay, and we'll say plat equals platforms I, just so we don't have to like keep saying platforms I. We can have this shorthand. So every time we use the platforms I variable, we don't have to write that. Okay, and then the way we render them is just like how we render the player as a rectangle. Of course, you can use images here, and then the function will be different, but we're just going to use rectangle, and it's okay if the color is white as well. We're not resetting the brush color, so every object's going to be white for this demo. Okay, so love graphics, rectangle, and we say plat.x, plat.y, plat.width, and then plat.height. Okay, so let's check out the result. There should just be platforms. Yep, here's some platforms, but of course we can't collide with them yet because we haven't written that part. Okay, so let's do that. So go up into your update function, and we can put this code near the keep player in boundaries code because collision boundaries is pretty similar to platform collision. So let's put it there. So new comment, platform collision. And then you can yoink the for loop you wrote. So you can yoink line 70, line 71 for this for loop. So plat, and then we're gonna write an if statement inside this for loop. So if player dot y is less than plat dot y plus player dot height. So we're checking that the player is above the platform. We only want to catch them if they're above the platform. And right now we're not going to worry about other kinds of collision other than top collision. We're only going to do top collision first. And that's because top collision is the most important. It's what allows the player to stand on the platforms. So we're only doing top collision for now. Okay, so then, and then we're going to write another if statement. And this is going to be a three-parter if statement. So what you can do is you can have them write it in one huge line, or you can divvy it up into 3 different lines, either way. So we're gonna say if player.y plus player.width, if player.y plus player.width is greater than no, my bad. This is if player.x plus player.width is greater than plat.x and player.x is less than plat.x plus plat.width. And then, so this just checks that the player is within the left and right boundaries of the platform. And then you're also going to have a third condition here, player.y plus player y velocity, so player.vel_y is greater than plat.y minus player.height. So this condition is just saying that in the next frame, the player's y velocity will make them collide with the platform. So we're going to be stopping them preemptively. And that's sort of better than if the player had already collided with the platform and then you try to fix it after something bad already happened. So basically we're asking for permission, not for forgiveness in this regard. It's just a better way to write collision. Okay, and then we're gonna have another if statement. So if player dot y plus player dot vel, oh wait, no. If player dot vel y is greater than 0, then, so this just means that the player is moving down. Like if they're falling, that's when we catch them. So we're just making sure that the player is actually falling and then they won't get caught during an upward movement. Okay. So after that, let's just preemptively close out these ifs. Okay, so inside here, we're going to have another clamp. But first you can do the same thing we did when we touched the ground with the player. We have player.jumping equals false. Player.vel_y equals 0. So we reset their ability to jump again, and we also make sure that they stop moving with the player.vel_y equals 0 part. Okay, so now let's do the clamp. So player.y equals clamp. First parameter is player.y again. And then the minimum value will also be -50, like how we put the ceiling before. It's above the screen. And then the maximum value is going to be the platform's y coordinate. So, the platform's y coordinate minus the player height, that is. So plat.y minus player.height. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's just look over the code. Okay, now let's test it out again. All right, we got our player, they can move around, and let's see. Okay, and we have collision. So this is another great stopping point. They might not get to this point in the first session, but if they do, that's really good. This kind of game can become a lot of different games in Love2D. Just a lot of different 2D types of games can start with this starting point.